you're involved with the fundraising aspect or just the general management of a riding association, please move next door. We do have an Elections Canada presentation undergoing right now as we speak. If you're an official agent, definitely please be in the Elections Canada training. If you're a candidate, it would probably be better to be in Elections Canada. It's optional to you, but candidates, it would be recommended. Very important information. They're going to teach you all the details of what you need to do to file paperwork, what sort of deadlines are necessary, answer any questions you might have, and it can be a bit of a dog's breakfast sometimes dealing with Elections Canada, but we've got an all-star team next door right now. They'll be able to answer any questions you have about how to interface, again, with Elections Canada. That said, let's dive into things with our first speaker, PPC Partnerships. We do have a video from Vaccine Choice Canada. Has anybody heard of Vaccine Choice Canada? Yeah. Very important work they have been doing over the last number of years. I wish they didn't have to exist. They have been beating the bandwagon of the concerns of vaccines for quite some time, but I think their issue really came to the forefront during COVID when many of us were told, you either have to take the vaccine or you can't maintain your job. You either take the vaccine or you have to leave school. You either take the vaccine or you can't see your loved ones. And that was such an affront to individual dignity, to personal autonomy. The work Vaccine Choice Canada is one that I think we need to continue to build upon. And let's start with the presentation, please.
Today is a historic day. Today, we are announcing the launch of the legal challenge against the Ontario government. We declare that the Ontario government has violated and continues to violate our rights and freedoms as guaranteed under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Like any other medical treatment, the right to choose does not belong to the state. It belongs to the individual in consultation with their physicians. We're going to hold the government accountable by conducting an evidence-based discussion in a court of law.
As everyone has said, this moment has been a long time coming, and I'm very, very grateful to all of you in the room, for the people who have been watching at home who can't be here. Thank you for taking part in the defense of medical freedom. That is what this is all about, and the right to choose whether or not to vaccinate.
The choice to exercise parental rights to informed consent is supported by the Universal Declaration of Bioethics and Human Rights, the Nuremberg Code, the Professional Code of Ethics, and all provincial acts.
I own my body, and I'm not going to let the government come in. I don't care what they write on the piece of paper. I am not ruled by paper. And if I have to die to protect myself and my children, I will do that. I have no problem. I have no problem doing that.
We stand here as the new Freedom Keepers. We will not be silenced, we will not go away, and we will not stop until our rights and freedoms are restored.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's have a warm revision round of applause for Vaccine Choice Canada's Mr. Ted Kuntz.
Good morning. I feel like I'm with family. I just want to express how grateful I am to the PPC party and to all of you. When I got a call from Nathan to say, would Vaccine Choice Canada be willing to attend this convention, I have to admit I was a little surprised. Most politicians cross the street when they see me. And then when I came in and I saw the banner that had freedom, responsibility, respect, fairness, I thought, now I know I'm in good company. You may not know is that Vaccine Choice Canada has been around for 42 years. And as Nathan said in his opening comments, I wish we didn't have to be here, but we do. And the reason that Vaccine Choice Canada exists is that in 1982, the Ontario government introduced legislation to make vaccines mandatory for our kids to go to school. And the initial legislation had no provision for personal belief or religious exemptions. That meant if you didn't vaccinate your child, they didn't get to go to school. Back in 1982, the same year that they signed the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So a group of parents lobbied the Ontario government for 2 years and were successful in having the legislation changed to allow for personal belief and religious exemptions. It was a group of parents that did that, not the government. It was a group of parents that stood up and defended our right to informed consent and bodily sovereignty, not the government. But that battle has not ended. In fact, it's escalated. That video shows the rally that we had in October of 2019, and the reason we did that is that the Ontario government has doubled down on their coercion. They introduced legislation that said if you didn't vaccinate with all recommended vaccines, that you had to take an education session. And it wasn't about informed consent, it was about indoctrination, it was about coercion. But they added something else. If you did not take every recommended vaccine, you had to sign an affidavit that said you're knowingly putting your child's life at risk. That's what they forced parents to do in the province of Ontario. Also in 2019, New Brunswick introduced legislation. You may not know that there's only 2 provinces in Canada that have vaccine mandates for kids to go to school. Many people believe every province has that, but that's not true. There's only 2, Ontario and New Brunswick. But in 2019, New Brunswick introduced legislation to remove personal belief and religious exemptions. And so Vaccine Choice Canada brought in 6 international experts to Fredericton. We testified before a subcommittee of the legislature. We brought in evidence to suggest that that is the wrong direction to go in. I personally stood up and said that if you go this route, I'm going to take you to the Supreme Court of Canada. And we were successful in defeating that legislation. But they weren't done. They brought back the legislation that fall, and they included the notwithstanding clause, which basically said, we know we're violating your rights and freedoms as parents, but we're going to do it anyways. And fortunately, the legislature voted that down as well. But I want to tell you a turning point in that conversation we had with the New Brunswick government. They brought in that legislation to remove personal belief and religious exemptions because of 12 cases of measles in the province of New Brunswick. And so we suggested that one of the legislators ask the public health officer of the 12 children in New Brunswick that got measles, how many of them were vaccinated? And what do you think the public health officer said? She said, I can't answer that question because that's private information. And the legislator was not done. They said, I'm not looking for names. I'm looking for a number between 0 and 12. Can you give me a number, please? And the public health officer refused to disclose that information to the legislature that was making that very important decision. And there was a hush that went through the room when she refused to give that information. And the legislators knew they were being lied to. We filed a Freedom of Information request. It took a year to get the answer. but 11 of the 12 were vaccinated. That's what we're up against. I suggest to you that the vaccine issue is the tip of the spear of the violation of our rights and freedoms. And if we don't recognize that, we will buy into the fact that the government gets to decide whose body this is. And I applaud the PPC party for standing up and declaring informed consent, bodily sovereignty, the right and responsibility of parents to make medical decisions for their children, and the right of children to have the guidance, wisdom, and protection of their parents. That's what's at risk here. We're in a battle, and the battle is for the sovereignty of this human life that we have. And I appreciate all of you being defenders of that sovereignty. There's a couple of slides I'd like to quickly walk through while I have a couple of minutes here. There's some concerns about vaccines that I think you need to be aware of. None of the vaccines on the childhood schedule were tested against a true placebo. Their claims that the vaccines have been tested for safety is false. There's been a significant increase in the chronic disease of our children. In 1960, 6% of children had a chronic disease. Do you know how many children today have a chronic disease? 60%, 6-0. Health Canada refuses to conduct vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies to prove safety and efficacy, and informed consent is not being upheld. Coercion is not consent. There's a number of independent researchers that conducted vaccine versus unvaccinated studies. This is one from 2017. That little body on the left, the white body, is the unvaccinated child. And those bigger bodies is the multiple times you have a risk of a chronic condition if you've been vaccinated. This is a similar vaccinated versus unvaccinated study. The blue line is unvaccinated children. The red line is vaccinated children. These are a number of disease conditions, and if you look at that very quickly, you'll see that if your child is vaccinated, the likelihood of contracting a disease condition increases substantially. That middle one of the chart is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. If you have an unvaccinated child, they have zero risk of ADHD, and if they have a vaccinated child, you see what that chart looks like. These are the actions that I would invite you to help us fight. Uphold informed consent, bodily sovereignty, and medical privacy. Protect the parents' right and responsibility to make medical decisions for their children. Get vaccine clinics out of our schools. They're being coerced. Make vaccine manufacturers liable for injury and risk and death caused by their products. And stop injecting pregnant mothers. This is the kind of tyranny we're up against. This is a website that you can find on the internet, how to get vaccinated without parental consent. They are undermining our right and our authority as parents. We've just produced a new book called A New Parent's Guide to Understanding Vaccination. We take great pains in that book to explain what informed consent actually is. I suggest to you that if you understand what informed consent is, nobody gave informed consent for the COVID shot. And I would also suggest that nobody has given informed consent to a childhood vaccine because we're only getting half the story. And as David Haskell said yesterday, if you're getting half the story, that's not information, that's indoctrination. And finally, is the National Citizens Inquiry conducted hearings in 9 cities across Canada in the last year and a half. I am the chair of the National Citizens Inquiry as well. We received testimony from 335 witnesses under oath. We have the largest library of information that was given under oath in the world, and our governments and our opposition, including Pierre Poilievre, refused to even acknowledge the National Citizens Inquiry exists. I suggest that it's a very important document that will help to inform your efforts in protecting our rights and freedoms. You are part of Reclaiming Canada, and I'm grateful that you're here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We really appreciate all the work you and your organization have done. If this is something important to you, if bodily autonomy is important, if your children's health is important, and I think it should be, please reach out, find Ted, get involved in his organization. And I just want to highlight something. Has everybody had a chance to look at our Purple Book? Everyone should have one of these. If you go to page 44, we had a very interesting discussion at PPCHQ just before this went to print. And as many of you know, we were the only party that actually came out against the COVID mandates. The conservatives, the fake conservatives, they talk a big game. They like to pretend that they were on the side of individual freedoms and liberty, but the reality is they weren't. In fact, you see many conservative governments at the provincial level. Doug Ford, for example, here in Ontario, kept people home, forced vaccinations, took away our rights. It was only the PPC in the political sphere that stood up and said, this is inappropriate, enough is enough. And so, even though we might be through COVID, we might be through the first wave of COVID, we thought it was very important to include that COVID policy in our booklet. Our hope is that nothing like this will ever happen again, but if it does, we need to be informed. So please, make sure you share this widely, get involved with Dave's organization, and please find a way to get connected if this is important to you. Now, along the lines of COVID, we had a number of different groups step up. I'd like to say the PPC represents the political option in Canada for bringing about change on a variety of different fronts, but there have been many different groups. We just heard about Vaccine Choice Canada that has been working on the vaccine front for many years. We've heard about the National Citizens Inquiry and Coalitions that have been fighting legal battles. There's another group I'd like to invite up today. This one is called the International Crisis Summit. Used to be called the International COVID Summit, but now COVID's kind of done, so they've kind of rebranded. They're called the International Crisis Summit. And their reason is very simple. They exist to ensure that something like we experienced during COVID never happens again. This was by far one of the biggest fake-outs, the organized, systemic dissolution of our individual rights happened on a global scale. And the more you dig into the reasons why, the more it really is disturbing. To that note, I would like to invite Dave Schostel from the International Crisis Summit to join the stage. I believe we have a video for Dave. Just bear with us while we figure out the technical details. Dave, why don't you come up on stage for a minute? Okay, there we go. Now we have the video.